Hey guys, what's up? This is Serge and welcome back to my channel. As we all know, as of the time this video is published, there is no built-in motion blur effect in Final Cut Pro. You can purchase one online and install it as a plugin, or if you have Motion 5, you can make your own. If you don't have Motion 5, you can download the motion blur plugin we build in this video from my website free of charge. Let's get started. Open Motion 5 and create a new Final Cut title project. Set your resolution and frame rate to the highest you plan on using. It's always better to downscale than to upscale, so let's set the resolution to 4K and frame rate to 60 frames per second. The duration doesn't really matter, so just leave this at the default duration. Click the Open button. First thing we need to do is delete the title text layer. Select the text layer in the Layers window and press Delete to remove it. Next, select the project layer at the top, and in the Inspector window, select Inspector and Properties. Scroll down to the Motion Blur category and adjust your settings. The Sample slider tells Motion how many frames to use when calculating motion blur. Setting this number higher will give you more detailed motion blur, but will also take longer to render. I would recommend leaving this at 8, or if you have a powerful machine, move it up to 16. The Shutter Angle slider decides how much blur is added to your clip. Setting this to 180 degrees will give you the most natural motion blur. This is the equivalent of using the 180 degree rule in your camera settings, meaning your shutter speed is double your frame rate. So if you film at 30 frames per second, the motion blur applied to your clip will be the equivalent of 1/60th of a second shutter speed. Setting this number higher will give you more motion blur, which can look good on certain clips. For demo purposes, let's set shutter angle to 360 so we can clearly see the effect. The next two steps are very important. First, we have to tell Motion to render motion blur. If we don't, Motion just ignores the previous settings. In the top of the canvas window, from the Render drop-down menu, select Motion Blur. Next, we have to adjust the way Motion handles timing of this effect. If we don't, anytime we change the length of our adjustment layer in Final Cut Pro, the effect will change. We want this effect to stay consistent, so in your timeline, move your playhead to the end of your clip and press Shift-M to add a marker. Right-click on the marker and select Edit Marker. In a pop-up window, from the Type drop-down menu, select Project Loop End. Now, when we make this clip longer in Final Cut Pro, the effect will just loop throughout our entire clip. That's all we need to do in Motion. Next step is to publish this effect to Final Cut Pro. From the menu bar, select File and Save As. Give your template a name and choose a category and theme you want to add it in. Let's make a new category and call it Motion Blur Adjustment Layer. Click Publish. Let's jump into Final Cut Pro and see how we can apply this adjustment layer to our clips. Down on my timeline, I have 3 clips. First one is just a simple shape moving across the screen with a transparent background just to better demonstrate this effect. I also have a couple of regular clips to show you how it looks when applied to an actual video clip. Open the Titles and Generators browser and scroll down to your new Motion Blur Adjustment Layer category. Select your adjustment layer and drag it down into your timeline over your clip. Right away, you can see the modest amount of motion blur applied to your clip. This is what the original clip looks like, and the same clip with motion blur. Subtle, but very effective. Let's stretch this adjustment layer over the other 2 clips and see how it looks without motion blur, then with motion blur applied. If you want to change any of the settings of this adjustment layer, that's also very simple. Right-click on the adjustment layer in the browser and select Open in Motion. Let's drag the shutter angle slider all the way up to exaggerate this effect. You can now either save it to overwrite the existing adjustment layer or select Save As to make another one. Back in Final Cut Pro, remove the first adjustment layer and add the new one. Let's take a look at these clips before and after motion blur has been added. There's one more effect we can add to make it look even better, but this only works with driving time-lapse or hyperlapse clips. Select your adjustment layer in the browser, right-click, and open in Motion. Select your background layer, and in the inspector, make sure Library is selected. Select Filters, Blur, and drag and drop a Zoom Blur filter to apply it to your background layer. Back in the inspector, in the Filters tab, make sure Publish OSC is checked. Click the drop-down arrow in the top right corner and select Publish. Do the same to all individual parameters in this box. Save your effect and publish it to Final Cut Pro. You can now apply this adjustment layer to your driving time-lapse clip, and in the viewer, use the on-screen controls to center it over the focal point of your clip. You can also adjust the individual settings of the Zoom Blur filter in the inspector. Let your clip render out, and you have this surreal motion blur effect applied to your clip. One last thing before we go. If you don't have Motion 5, you can download the motion blur adjustment layers I made from my website. Click the link in the video description and download the included file. Double-click the downloaded file to unzip it. Next, in Finder, go to your Home folder, then Movies, Motion Templates, and Titles. Drag and drop the downloaded folder into this title folder. Close Finder and restart Final Cut Pro. Now in your Titles and Generators browser, you'll see a motion blur category with 8 adjustment layers I made. Enjoy! If you enjoy these tutorials and free plugins I make, I'm starting a Patreon page where you can support me to help me keep the lights on. I'll have a link for it in the video description as soon as it's done. If you can't contribute at this time, you can always show your support by clicking the like button and subscribing to my channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you back here next week.